Good morning and welcome to Snow Talk, the podcast of the Snow and Ice Management Association. We bring you trends, stories, news, and personalities that are shaping the professional snow and ice management industry. I'm your host, Martin Torado, and this season of Snow Talk is sponsored by Western Snowplows and Fisher Engineering. Thank you for their ongoing support. Big topic, an important topic, timely as well. This one is about the salt shortage from 2025-26 winter season, and even talking about what that projects like into the next year. This caused a significant amount of angst and some concern from snow professionals throughout North America this past year. And I'm happy to welcome our guest here, Phil Sexton, ASM from WIT Advisors. Phil, if I went through your entire bio here, we'd be 20 minutes into the podcast. Let me just give a summary. Amongst other things, you're a subject matter expert, worked with some very large winter management companies such as Brickman, Rupert, Chief Knowledge Officer at CIMA, WIT Advisors. I guess you're the owner, principal, correct, of WIT Advisors.
Mm-hmm.
And then an important thing was your master's degree in sustainability and environmental management from Harvard University, where your thesis focused on salt sustainability amongst a broader topic used for winter management and winter services. Adjunct professor at SUNY Cobleskill, and one time part-time hops grower. Just throw that one out there for people.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Good memory.
Yeah. And I'm probably forgetting a number of other things, but you're located now in the Adirondacks of upstate New York, correct? And just wanted to go and welcome you to the podcast, and we're going to get into the salt shortage from this past winter. So thanks, Phil, for being on here. In our June issue of Snow Business Magazine from CIMA, we're focusing on the salt supply and salt shortage, and you wrote an important piece to that upcoming article, and then had to do with some of the factors that led into this past winter's salt supply issues, salt shortage. Just give us an overview here of what led up to the issues that happened this past winter.
Yeah, I think I'll try to reference the article a little bit. So, I think what happened was really a more of a domino effect of several different variables that have been happening for quite a number of years, actually. And, where I sit today, I have a home and an office here just outside of Lake Placid, New York. So, yeah, oddly, I tend to go north when everybody else goes south, but that's where, a lot of winter happens really in upstate New York. And one of the major mines of the Northeast is located in Western New York. And there's another mine located in Central New York. And those aren't necessarily the only contributors, but they're representative of what's really going on in the grander scale or the grander scheme of the salt commodity supply, really particularly in the Great Lakes regions, Midwest, where a lot of salt's still being used, right? And so why the mine it's actually in Mount Morris, Western New York, why that mine's so important to know about is it's the last mine that was actually ever developed, to my knowledge, globally. And that was in the early 2000s, like 2000, 2001. So there's really never been another mine that's been developed. And so that's why we're so reliant on salt as a global commodity, and why, whenever there's a surplus of supply that's required, that's got to come from somewhere else. And so even with that mine, which is about 25 years old-ish, it has its own problems. So there's a lot of infrastructure issues. We're finding a lot of these mines are now realizing the environmental impact that they're causing. Several of these mines are well underneath some of the the Great Lakes and Finger Lakes, both upstate New York, and then as you go out into like Erie, Cleveland area, all those lakes. So that's where a lot of these mines are, and I think our industry is become quite a bit more tuned into the fact that sodium chloride is an environmental pollutant that now has become even a liability for some of these mines. Then when you talk about infrastructure, mine shafts collapse more often than about. They have to create new entry points in these mines. That costs a lot of money. There's been some labor demand issues, both some strikes and some labor shortages that happen a lot up in the Canadian region, especially. And then you think about the weather. Last season, I think most of the snow markets received what I always describe as normal. So we had a normal season again, and a lot of folks, including the supply chain, is sort of considering it an unprecedented season. But really what was unprecedented was the seasons before that, which were unprecedented light seasons, right? And so it's not surprising. We, just like a lot of other things, we've become rather short-sighted, I think, in that change in the weather over the last 3 years. Everybody started to normalize that rather than call that the unprecedented or the variable. And so this season, we've even heard, like, if you kind of Google this problem, like, oh, it was a really early season. It's like, well, November, December is not an early season in upstate New York, right? I mean, I remember trick-or-treating on Halloween in a snowmobile suit. And so and although I'm older, but I'm not that old, right? So I mean, like, it hasn't changed that much. Like, we all too forget, there's been several October storms in the Northeast here in the last few decades. So there's all that's happened. And then the recent economic climate with tariffs, that plays a little bit of a role in it now. There's something called the Jones Act, which a lot of people don't know about. That it's actually it's an act that's been around since the early 1920s, but it's the Merchant Marine Act, essentially. But like, what a lot of folks don't know is some of the commodity that's even coming from other parts of the world, depending on where it stops and where it has to get shipped to next. A lot of times now salt has to get unloaded onto another barge, and it has to be brought in with a U.S. vessel. And so there's all these additional constraints now related to regulation and tariffs and things like that have contributed to it as well. But again, it's not like this happened this past season. Like, this has been a domino effect really since the last salt shortage we experienced about 10 years ago. And SIMA got really involved with that back then. And I remember we even had an event related to it out in, where was that, Grand Rapids and
Detroit, yeah, the salt.
Detroit, yeah. So it was so like, this is not new. Like, this is sort of, this happens a couple times a decade, really. And then when you really think about the supply chain, this what I'm going to say next is not meant to be critical of the suppliers, but it's like, this is a commodity where, just like anything else, supply and demand sort of dictates the price, right? And so the supply is really controlled by just a handful of really suppliers, really, that's then supplying to a very fragmented and broad-based industry. I mean, you've got municipalities and contractors, state agencies, counties, locals, and so the distribution of that is really complicated. And so then, we start, anytime that there's a shortage in the supply, that's what then public safety and the municipalities actually have the upper hand, not necessarily intentionally, but that's where the supply goes first. And then we as private contractors, which I have been for many years, we get really stuck, at the bottom of the pile, fighting for the same scraps. And then that's why we end up paying a lot of money, because you can't, a lot of these Office of General Service contracts or state contracts, which then many times municipalities get to attach themselves to those. They can't actually charge more in those settings. And so the only place where they can charge for the increased cost to bring in a limited supply, it actually just filters down to the private industry. So that's what happened to us this year. And plenty of us were paying upwards of $300 a ton this year, somewhere mid to the end of the season, if you could find it at all. So that's really the grand story.
Yeah, what's the usual price in your area we're seeing in upstate New York?
We saw mid to high 70s to low to mid 80s per ton. And then it just kept creeping up. I mean, the start of this already happened at the beginning of the snow season. It was already in play. And then when a majority of the country saw earlier snowfalls, and then you may remember there was one huge storm that swept from Texas all the way up into northern Maine, that just sucked the supply out. And so when that happened, there was a lot of increases by $100 a ton. And then, like I say, there were places here in central upstate New York where it was about $300 a ton, sometime in mid-February.
Yeah, and you even mentioned, so you're upstate New York, I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and certainly a factor here that we saw was 1 to 2 storms in November, probably starting in mid-November, which was a surprise compared to prior years. Yeah. And there was another significant storm in early December. I heard from some Simon members, contractors in Chicago area in particular, that by the end of December, they had done more snow service work already that this past winter than they had the entire winter prior. We were only through December. We still had, January, February, March to go through. So certainly then those early storms contribute to, I need to check if I do have enough salt supply and access to salt supply, because we got 3 more months to go here.
Yeah, for sure.
One thing with that is, we're talking about one of the headlines of the article, and talk about just like this deja vu, and this isn't new, and similar experience. So I'm going on 19 years here at Simon. This is probably the 3rd year there's been a salt shortage, if you will. And there was probably even a year in between there where it was kind of one, but maybe it didn't materialize. So again, it isn't like a new and unusual thing. I was just recently spoke to a salt supplier, a distributor really. And he had a number of customers that asked some of the same questions of like, how did this happen? Why the price is so high? Why I don't have supply? And he was like, how long have you been doing this? And the answer was, we've been doing this for 3 years. He's like, well, I've been doing this for well over 20 years. This isn't a new thing. This is the same factors that are kind of hit in the past and have hit again this past winter. So one of the conversation pieces I want to have for this podcast is, I don't want to spend the entire time talking about, woe is me, this is bad, what are we going to do? It was terrible. It's like, what are the things that we can do moving forward to kind of change some of the, I would say that some of the core challenges and issues that exist that kind of keep creating this market phenomenon. And I'm just going to go ask you a couple of, some questions we go through as to kind of like, what are your suggestions as a consultant and a subject matter expert and someone that knows and talks to people in this field for a long time and certainly an ongoing is what would be kind of some of your suggestions or answers to this? And I'm going to start with one initially is like, hey, I'm a local service provider contractor. located in, more of a compact urban or even suburban area, I don't have a lot of places to store salt beyond a storm or two. What should I be doing if I'm in that scenario?
Well, good question. And I just want to capture something you said before that too. Is like this salt shortage, I think, is a bit more unprecedented or unlike any other we've seen, in that I think a lot of people don't realize there was a salt shortage the season before. It's just it wasn't as widespread. So I was literally on the phone with the guy from New York DOT, who's the largest municipal user in the country. I was on the phone with the guy that buys the salt that said, "Hey, I got to go. I just got a message that we just got cut off of salt." So I've never known of a New York State DOT being cut off of salt before, but their major supplier, because of there's something that was legislated in New York State, which is the Buy American Salt Act. That actually caused a ripple effect through the entire supply chain, at least in New York State, which then created a domino effect into the neighboring states, because the state essentially, enacted it's like an eminent domain law almost, in that they can just suck up the supply because legally, right? And so then that sucks supply out everywhere else. That was the canary in the coal mine of what happened this year. And so we as an industry both sort of get amnesia on this anytime it happens. And then in some cases, it's just awareness. Like, I don't think a lot of people were aware that the salt shortage was just as bad in New York State last year as it was this year. It became accentuated because then winter became more widespread again, which again is normal. So now to your question on the supply, if I'm a smaller provider that has limited resources to store it, I would start with, well, where's the 5 to 10 truckloads of salt that you wasted that you didn't actually need to apply first? So I would start with figure out where your waste is first, because everybody's got it, right? And I speak to, I was at one time, considered the largest time and material contractor in the country, or at least I was running one of those operations, and a lot of our work was time and material. I think some of where the salt shortage comes from is in how we're selling it, because if I can just apply more and sell more, that's why I need so much salt. And so that's why I run out of salt, is because, particularly if I'm a smaller contractor with just limited supply capacity. So I've always been relying on this as a just-in-time delivery commodity. So I think before you even figure out the storage issue, figure out the usage issue, because and figure out, contractually how you're selling it, because that's why you keep running out, is because you're relying on most of your revenue and your profit is related to the salt, when it really shouldn't be, right? And I think, I write in the article that the days of per volume, per amount, per time billing is just further accentuates how much of a liability that whole contract service provider method is. So I would, and I just speak confidently from experience. If you keep running out of salt, it's because you're using too much. It's not because you don't have enough storage, right? And and usually the number one reason why you're using so much is because you're selling it that way. So I'm just going to stress that first. Mm-hmm. Now, legitimately, there are some others that are trying to do the right thing. They just don't have enough capacity. I don't necessarily have a lot of suggestions to it, other than I am seeing from our experience ways of co-opting the storage. Sometimes you can do that with a supplier who will keep it on inventory. You're going to pay a little bit more for it, but that again should be the incentive to be using less of it, right? And so again, I would go back to the contract model. And then I think the other thing that I normally find is those that are having a capacity issue. It's like, now's the time, if you're not already doing, to really start looking seriously at how you implement brine again, because you just need a heck of a lot less of the actual solid material. But in return, you'd have to actually set up a tank farm infrastructure. So a lot of folks are doing that much more effectively. So that would be something else that I'd want to start considering. We had a lot of pain last year, so our opportunity now is to learn from it before we forget it again. It's kind of, like I say, we get a little bit of amnesia in our industry, and so I just want to keep the pain out in front of us right now as best we can, because that's how we learn.
Yeah, great points. The part of some of the questions here too is kind of, you said, like the pain points, or I'm actually going to pose them a little bit too, is like overcoming objections. So you hit on one there at the end. I'm just going to put out there an overcoming an objection of, like, someone says, starting a liquids or brine program, it seems expensive and it may not work. Why should I start one?
Well, because it just makes good business sense from our experience, right? And from my personal experience. So I get it, though. If you don't have any experience with it, I get it. It's kind of a scary idea to think about making that kind of a change. So maybe just allow me to shift your mindset first. You've been using brine the entire time you've been using granular salt, because that granular material doesn't actually do anything for you until it converts to a brine. It's that brine reaction is what then lowers the freeze point of water on the surface below 32 degrees down to around 20 to 15, depending on how you want to look at it. So you've always been using it. So the real question is, what's it really going to cost to convert your infrastructure, and how are you going to pay for that? And so I can understand, again, particularly if you're a contractor that's more in like a time and materials model and you're reliant on the weather to happen, I can understand why you're hesitant. That's, again, the other reason why there's much more of an incentive now to start changing the contract model. Anytime there's been extreme years like this, I've been involved where many years ago, like the entire Chicago market was all time material. And then when we kept having winters like we just did, it actually changed the model in 1 year. I saw a whole market shift in 1 year. So I think the next question is going to be is like, how do I get my customer to buy into the idea of letting me charge them differently for this that would allow me to then innovate, right? And some of that innovation would go back to brine. Brine just makes a lot of sense. We're wasting a lot of material, even in parking lots, just where I could show you probably 1,000 pictures of the same picture where all the salt's in the curb and the gutter of the lot. So it's like that right there is a reason to try it a different way, because when you're doing it with brine, it's both concentrated and it's going exactly where you want it. There's way less waste. And so, the problem kind of circles back to the same issue, which is we're wasting the material. We're always wasting this material. Tell me you're calibrating. If you're not calibrating, that's another way that you're wasting material. You're likely putting down 50% more than you need to be. So these are simple things that don't necessarily need to cost a lot of money. In some cases, don't cost any money. It requires shifting our mindset again, though. And I think that's where I keep stressing time and material billing, to me, is becoming more of a liability for our industry and as an individual company, because quite frankly, the customers know more about this now as well, and they know that there's this waste. And so, anytime I saw a lot of clients this year, or a lot of contractors this year going to their clients asking for more money because the salt price raised, and I've seen more often than not the clients pushing back even further now because they know this waste exists.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, no, you're the contractor. You're supposed to be the professional. You figure it out. Right. That's the pushback that we're starting to see even more so now related to salt.
Yeah. Great points. There's a lot more resources out there now on starting a liquids or brine program, but it's not just from SIMA. You were involved in SIMA's. We have a program it's now free for members. You can go through liquids or brine training, but manufacturers have done a lot of that as well too. I see it even from some local suppliers, even municipalities. And there's some municipalities, I heard a story this past winter that kind of used, without having to spend thousands of dollars on brand new equipment, kind of was able to put together a liquids program from just equipment that they had in-house. And it was a little bit of a, kind of a hardware store type, MacGyver scenario, but it worked. It worked, and again, saving them on the amount of rock salt that they were applying to surfaces of that municipality. So there's a lot of other examples now that I think there were that's compared to like 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. There's much more training and people who are able to provide some expert advice that can really assist in that manner, and just kind of getting over the learning curve. And how can a small business, small contractor be able to at least start up a brine program using liquids in some capacity. You also hit on a second thing that's kind of an just kind of an interesting thing is like, my market only, let's say customers only buy time and materials contracts. That seems like it could be changing, but what have you seen kind of when you hear that from somebody? Oh, my area, they're only buying time and material contracts. What are some things that are changing in that environment when you hear that?
Well, okay, so I'll take a look at this from a couple different angles. I've been a small kind of local contractor in my days, and I've been a part of, what's considered the largest operation. And I think everywhere in between. What you're finding right now is, for any of you that are aware of all of the, call it the private equity roll-ups going on in our industry now as well, even just the snow side of the industry, that's real. I can guarantee you there is no private equity organization that's involved with this industry that is pushing for more time and material contracts. They want predictable, repeatable revenue.
Yep.
And frankly, most clients nowadays would prefer a predictable, repeatable spend or budget. The problem is actually is because there's too many of us that are selling it that way still. Because my assessment of the industry as a whole is because the majority of the industry is still too afraid to put a real number to it. We don't know how to estimate it. And so therefore, time and material is safe. So all I would say is you're not going to convert every client, but I will tell you, I guarantee you, if you have 10 clients, 20 clients, let's say you have 20 clients, I guarantee you 25% of those that are T&M right now will be open to this. It's all in how you sell it, right? And particularly, it's got to be about them, not just about you, right? So you want to give them something that's repeatable and predictable. And you know what? There's the way that we sell it right now is, if we have a super light winter, great. You don't have to leave all the money on the table. I'll give you something back, right? Some are getting creative now with, If you're a landscape company, let me give it to you as a credit for an enhancement on your property for the landscape, or we'll just give it to you as a credit, period. How about we give it to you as a credit towards next year? So for loyalty, because again, I wrote an article several years ago in Snow Business that was related to all the different types of contract models. But I think we also have to think about it in terms of when we're educating and selling to the client, whenever we have a chance to have their attention on this, really think about this. Like when you think about what we have to do pre-season, pre-storm, post-storm, post-season, how much of that is the actual service of the plowing and the ice management? Like I've been studying this for a long time now, and only about, when you look at the total cost of servicing a site, only about 30, maybe 35% of it is the actual plowing and applying some salt. It's everything else that goes into it before the season, before the storm, after the storm, all the dispatching, all the false alarms, all that our clients genuinely aren't really aware of all that, right? And we don't really sell it that way. And so that's where I see, both in our experience selling it and quite a number of other, what I would call very successful contractors selling it, they really sweat the details of what all that costs. And that's what a lot of times convince you, like, you don't really have a choice but to sell it differently now, right? If you want to compete. Because if you think you're in a time and material only market, you're kidding yourself, because it's changing on you and you may not see it yet. But all the big markets in particular, it's changing behind the curtain somewhere. If there's any of these markets where private equity is involved and they're rolling up these companies, it's already happening. I guarantee it.
Yeah. Let's keep delving into the customer side of it too, to explore that. And that's the crunch underneath your boots. So I kind of learned this from you years ago. Is you know what? Again, this is the overcoming objections question. I had a few customers call and they just said, you know what? I can't hear the crunch underneath my boots when I came in to the office or to the facility I'm working at this morning. Can you come out here and apply more salt? And typically, what you hear is the contractor says, hey, you know what? One of my jobs is to keep the customer happy. I'm sending the trucks back out. We're gonna reapply again, even though according to my knowledge, tracking and even looking at surface temperature, we've applied enough that parking lot or that facility should be relatively free and clear of snow and ice. What's your response to when you hear that from a customer?
Well, so I get it. I've gotten plenty of those calls in my career. I get it. The first line of defense is go do it. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but go do it. But don't put down too much to make it crunch. Just put down, spoon feed it. In exchange, though, have the conversation with the customer. We have to get some courage on this. The customer is not always right, period. The customer is not always right. Doesn't mean you have to be disrespectful about it. It's just that, okay, I'm going to come out and I'm going to see where it's slippery and I'll go ahead and reapply. So though, that crunch is waste, because that, again, it requires just making sure they understand too, like, you don't actually want me to have crunch for you, because if you want crunch, I'll put stone down. It's just that clients perceive the crunch as traction, and that's a perceived quality of service or a perceived level of safety that the reason they're still asking for is because they don't understand the science behind the salt. So the salt, they want the salt to do exactly what we need to do, is like that salt has to convert to a brine in order to then be effective. The client doesn't know that. And I think, candidly, there's enough newcomers to the industry that don't know that either. And so I'm not saying that to any of you that are listening that didn't know that. It's like, I didn't know that either. And I put down millions of tons of this stuff in my career before I knew this was a problem. So if you're new to this, the advantage you have over us that have been in this for decades is now we know. So you've got the education 30 years sooner than we did. That's the difference. So do something with it and talk to your client about it, right? And sometimes the excuse is, well, the client won't listen to me, or I don't have access to them, or whatever. And it's like, I get that. You still have to try, though, right? And that's why I say, again, as an industry, we've got to get more courageous about this. Otherwise, we're just going to keep repeating the same mistake. And it's going to be one of the drivers. It won't be the only driver. It's going to be one of the drivers for the next salt shortage, because we are generally just wasting it. Yeah.
If you can hear the crunch, you've over applied.
Particularly, like, we see a lot of crunch on bare pavement after a storm, because somebody sees a sheen or a perceived sheen, or they see some water. And it's like, and so put it down just in case is sort of the issue. Hey, if you have that glaze or that sheen or whatever, that's where brine's your best friend, actually, because it'll combat it immediately, versus that rock salt has to convert to moisture to convert to a brine, which sometimes in those scenarios, it could take an hour and a half if it ever converts at all. Right. Versus the brine will react immediately. It's like 30 seconds versus, 90 minutes. So that's the other reason to start thinking about it in those terms.
Yeah.
The other thing is, the same client, a lot of times, retail is a big player in this, right? They have a lot of asphalt. Retail also does not want any of that crunch in the building. So the more crunch you're creating outside the building, the more crunch is then being introduced in the building, which then causes them all kinds of other issues. Flooring, people are slipping on marbles now because it's the rock salt. It's rotting out the door jambs. It's creating more waxing of the floors cost, rugs, the whole thing. Like, it's a nightmare for them in the building. So do them a favor. Like, most of our property managers or our clients know more about the building interior than they'll ever understand about the exterior. So it's really upon us as the professionals to help educate them. Like, hey, I'll do it. Like, I don't want to upset you. I'll do it. Just understand, if I come back and it's not necessarily like this is the consequence for you, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
There's a lot of times the conversation, I never thought about it that way. There's a lot of times what we get. Well, what's the alternative then, Phil? Well, let me come squirt some of this stuff instead of, broadcast this stuff. Let me give that a try, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, good. Hey, I want to go just back into, again, some of the pain points, just in the salt shortage, salt supply, and the cost. Simon just did this survey, and we heard from close to 300 respondents that, again, said prices increased by more than $100 a ton. 43% of respondents said that was the case. Are you? And then I heard from some people, again, like, did you have a materials escalation clause in your contracts, your agreements with customers? A lot of people didn't. Do you recommend that? I mean, we have that in some advanced contract clauses. What do you recommend there on how to just deal with the fluctuation in price that contractors had to absorb if they had to then pay $250 a ton or more, just the short term, just to get through the winter?
Well, I'll show you this. I've done it all kinds of ways in my career. This is how we sell it now in our sustainable winter management program. So if I'm not allowed if I'm not allowed to have a contract that incentivizes me to use less salt. So if it's time and material and that's the only choice we have, I can live with that. I need two things in return though then. One is I need some sort of preparedness fee, particularly if it doesn't snow. And I also need an escalator if the price of salt goes out of whack over a certain amount. Or choose this other model, which is really a seasonal contract, performance-based contract that if we have a light year, I'll even give you a little money back. I don't need an escalator then, because as long as you're not requiring me to keep using more salt. Because if you're the one that's driving me to use the more salt, then that means I don't have control of it, and nor do I have control of the cost. So you're going to have to pay me if the price goes up, say over $10 more a ton or something like that, right? Or 20% more. So you'd have to sort of negotiate that. But all I'm suggesting is I'd try to sell it two ways, because your client naturally is going to want to push back on having any kind of exposure to cost increase. Okay, well then allow me to do it in a way that allows me to control the cost and control the amount of salt. That's a different contract model though.
Yep, correct. Okay, yeah, good. Hey, one of the other pain points that comes out too is just, again, the whole part of governments and municipalities seizing control or having priority control over the salt supply is like, how can they continue to do that and completely just kind of disregard the need for the private contractor? What's some advice that you have in that regard?
Well, I mean, I guess is the question, is there something that we can do as an industry to reduce or eliminate the municipal priority?
Yeah.
And, I can't remember if you mentioned, I even served on this New York salt reduction task force, and this came up actually. So, I mean, we weren't the folks that were creating new laws. There's like 3 new pieces of legislation in play in New York right now. But I can tell you, I've even spoken with like the transportation chair of the New York Assembly here about this. And being New York State, like it may be a good example of what's going to happen everywhere else. I don't think anybody's going to do anything about that. Municipal priority is going to remain municipal priority because it's all tied to public safety. Now, is our work tied to public safety as well? Yes. It's just that just to help people understand the reasoning behind this is it's like, you've got main thoroughfares, secondary roads, and then you've got sort of the tertiary roads, which would be like cul-de-sacs and HOAs and things that we probably service. People can't get to parking lots unless they can get on the roads first. So that's always going to be the case. So it's both a public safety and business continuity priority. They've got to get on, the trucks have to get on the main highways first before they can get to the parking lots. The other thing that you have to think about, and this is really much more politically driven, this is my opinion, so I'm not saying that anybody told me this. What we do is taxable. And so if New York State, for example, is taxing salt, New York State, in a weird way, taxes salt twice. It taxes salt when we purchase the material, then it taxes salt when we apply it. So that's a whole nother debate. I'm probably already
right. Yep.
A couple people fired up about it already, like, yeah. But New York State, which means most states, aren't going to do anything about that because that's revenue for the state. So if it goes up to $300 a ton and we have to tax for that twice now, I don't see where there's a reason why any state would change that, because all that's doing is just increasing the tax revenue. That's a good thing for the state. So is that something that we should lobby in the future? Perhaps. I've just become, I guess, in my years, as I get older, I've just started to learn which hill to die on and which one not. I don't think we die on that one, because I don't think it's a battle that's gonna. I don't even think it's a battle that's going to be had. We're just going to get shut down on it because it's not a priority, not in the grand scheme of things. Mm-hmm. It's a short-term blip that, yes, does hurt us as private practitioners in this very large industry. It's a blip, though. It's not. It's not a chronic issue. It's a very short-term acute issue that I don't think we'll ever get enough attention on. And I'm telling you, because I've tried. I sat on this task force for 3 years, and we brought up over and over again. It's just it's dead on arrival. So don't try to fight it anymore. Don't stop getting frustrated about it, I guess, but I just want to be clear with people from my point of view, where I think it's probably going to be a waste of your time trying to battle it.
Mm-hmm. I'll give my opinion on that too. It's not, if people do want to die on a hill for that, or go to battle on a hill, be prepared. In my sense is be prepared to do it every year.
Oh,
I hear this every time there's a salt shortage, but the years there's not, you don't hear from them. They don't care. It's like, you need to make it that you do care whether that year a DOT municipality sees supply of the salt or not. If you're just waiting every so often until it affects you directly, I think you're going to look like another, I'll be honest, a complainer. Legislators will look at you as a complainer, and you take a look at. Unfortunately, there are some realities of politics and getting elected that when the public is not served in the ways of like priorities of streets, highways, major roads, and interstates, that people get lose elections, they get recalled, they lose their careers. That's going to be a powerful impact in the legislative side. I personally don't think it's I think it's something that's definitely worth exploring, but you can't just bring it up whenever it's convenient for you. It needs to be something that's brought up consistently and regularly amongst more than one or a small handful of people. It needs to be brought up amongst a much larger, and that's kind of what you're facing. You're talking about trying to change any kind of legislation. So it's good point. It's painful. It can be painful, but I do think some of the things we've talked about and the solutions can be overcome, regardless of whether a large entity, a government entity, seizes current salt supply.
Yeah. I think in this case, I think the main point from my perspective is, because I actually like how you said that. Like, if it's important enough, then you gotta fight for it consistently. Otherwise, again, our battling this is also just very ephemeral, if you will. It's just temporary, right? And so I think that's how it's perceived. It's like, this is just a short-term issue, not worth getting into. I want to say though, one of the things I noticed in the survey of the almost 300 Simon members, presumably, right, is more than half, even through this shortage, basically said they had enough. Like, they kind of ran shorter than they usually in a year, but they had enough. And I don't think that's incoincidental that those same folks, respondents, are probably following these practices, right? Measuring and calibrating and preventing the bond, the anti-icing, and they're using data now and they're analyzing. And so, is that the whole industry? No, but I think the ones that said that they still had enough, I can tell you, we managed this whole SWIM, Sustainable Winter Management Program. Nobody in this program that we worked with ran out. Um, did they start to get a little concerned? Yes, and then they proactively brought some more in. But ideally, they still have salt in the bin now because they were already following the practices, right? And so the idea, I find it interesting when you and I were speaking earlier, we hear a lot about ways that people figured out how to use less because the supply chain was failing them. That's cool. My question would be then is like, how come you're just not doing that all the time? Because we do get innovative when we need to. But I think the problem with salt a lot of times is it's still, even at $100 a ton, it's still pretty darn cheap. Um, so there's not a lot of, I can understand why there's not a lot of incentive to get really good at conserving it until you have to, right? And so that's why I go back to, let's try not to get too much amnesia on this go around. And because I've already, we have relationships with the supply chain. This is already predicted to happen next year again. So this would be 3 years in a row where I am. So it's like, so I think this is actually what's becoming the norm.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a question, was, or just even a discussion point is like, you're right. People that have been in this for a number of years, this isn't the first time this has happened. I heard from plenty of people from this past winter that said the exact same thing. Like, this isn't the first time this has happened to us. We've made some changes where we're adapting to lower supply and some higher prices, and there's a number of things that we've done to mitigate those risks. And these are the things that you need to get used to when you're working in an environment and snow services that are very much weather dependent. And then the data point that you brought up too, I was looking at this, is 51% of people of the 300-ish respondents says we had enough salt, but your inventory was lower than usual. So they made do with what they had. 20% had no low inventory challenges at all. So that means that, again, did they do some co-opting? Did they work with a supplier? Maybe they were able to store some more on a large commercial site, in ways that are kind of covered and protected and kind of out of the way. They came up with some more creative solutions than just like, oh my gosh, what do we do now? So I do think that some of the things, again, ongoing best practices, training, information, helping each other through relationships and community that organizations and other, meetings and events and collaborations have, it's helping. We've found ways to help to help each other and to find some of the best practices and training for each other.
One of the things that just occurred to me when you were saying all that is it's something I wrote in the article that's coming out, but there's a couple articles, but it's simply this: like, if for nothing else, if for no other reason, if you're in business, think about it this way. I'm not necessarily a person that believes in starting a business to sell it, but generally speaking, a lot of people over time sell their business, and quite a number of people in this industry, they become multimillionaires, years down the road when they sell it. Think about this, though. The buyers of our companies, they're going to look at, I'm going back to the time and material companies. If you're selling snow, time and material per inch, per occurrence, per plow, per application, think about what it is you have to sell. You have a business now that's totally reliant on the weather and the commodity. Two things that we can't control. We can't control the weather, and this salt shortage further proves once again, and we can't control the commodity. But when you're selling snow that way, you're not in control of your business. The weather is, and the salt supplier is. That's scary shit to me. Yeah. I wouldn't want that.
Yeah. Someone
potentially there's nothing else you can do. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone purchasing or going to take over, even if it's passing on your company to a key employee or a family member, such as, children. don't you want to pass on a more sustainable business model to them versus the riskier one that you've just described?
Big time. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Perfectly said. Yeah.
yeah,
But that's where we have to look at ourselves in the mirror like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, that's what actually really looks like. So I could be a snow company, same size, same profitability, same market. And if private equity came in and one of them was selling it seasonally, performance based, and one of them is selling it the other way, they're going to pick the one that's predictable, repeatable every time. Every time. So
yep,
you actually just devalued your company by selling it this way.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, as we start wrapping up the podcast, Phil, I do want to ask you this, like, and you just touched on it just a few minutes ago. Let's say I'm heading into September and I'm really planning towards next winter. There is a potential just because of those inventories being depleted and other factors. What if there's an couple early snowfalls? I'm going to need to be prepared for salt shortage year two in a row. And like you said, in upstate New York, it could be going on year three.
Yeah.
What's a quick couple of things you would say to somebody like, you need to do this?
I think short term, there's a few calls to action, but I think you have to commit early to bringing in your salt supply. I always say if you have the ability to and you can afford to, you need to understand what 75% of your normal seasonal usage is and have that on hand in inventory. That's what real snow pros do. Um, and so, I can understand though that while I use about 1,500 tons in a year normally, well, there's two things to look at there. So how much of that is waste? Can you already think about invest in some measuring technology and already start to plan to cut that usage? Maybe not in the first year, but you're probably everywhere that we've deployed what we do, salt use gets cut in half. So that 1,500 could be 750. And if you only got 500 tons or less storage capacity, that's an incentive to me. The only reason it's not an incentive to you is if you're selling it by the amount. So then I would start looking further into these contracts because the time to convert clients away from time and material and per amount contracts is right now because they paid a lot of money last year. Most clients went over budget last year in their snow category. Now is the time to say, hey, we can keep doing it this way, but there is a better way. Let me show you. Right. And then I think I have in the article, brine, baby, brine. So it's like, if you're not using it all right now, start trying it. Just do it with walkways and things like that first. Everybody thinks that walkways is where the most liability is, but it's kind of not. Most people are still slipping and falling in the parking lot or stepping onto a walk situation. But try it small scale if you haven't tried it at all. It works. It really, like 10 years ago, we were still trying to convince people, but the convincing stage is over. Like there's too many case studies out there that show how well it works. So get on board if you're not yet. And again, if you don't have a way to meter the salt right now, that's a huge opportunity for you. If you've even got only a fleet of 5 trucks, I guarantee you there's 3 out of your 5 that are wasting, if not more, right? And then I think the last thing is just simply, if you're not already convinced, like this is a commodity you need to respect the heck out of because you have no control over it. You have no control over the supply and you have no control over the pricing. So that's a mindset that you've got to sort of play into your business model. It's a finite resource, and every time you're sending other people out there to apply it, do they even know how much money they're literally putting down the drain?
Great points. I'm just going to reiterate these same things, and they will be in that June issue of Snow Business. But you're right. The calls to action: commit early, measure, storage, you mentioned the 75% of annual capacity or estimated inventory. Use brines in some manner, get educated and start experimenting in that respect. Salt's a commodity that fluctuates tremendously on price, and it should be treated as such. So, good summary points there. I do want to say, Phil, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for joining the Snow Talk podcast. Also want to thank, of course, our sponsors, Western Snowplows and Fisher Engineering, for making this happen. Great conversation. Look forward to talking to you and discussing our next guest on Snow Talk.
All right. Good luck next season, everybody. Sorry I'll miss you at the symposium this year.